All right, we are live. Hello and welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn here with Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour with you all. I have had the pleasure of chatting with our guest speaker. I believe it was last year, around July, actually, so around the same time last year. And I'm really thrilled to hear what she's got to say about all of the things that, just can help us to be better people in the workplace and beyond. So buckle your seatbelts, get out a clean paper and pad, old school style, get your, writing brain on, and let's come together in this next hour to share and learn and grow together. With that said, I don't want to take too much time going over some housekeeping guidelines, but I just want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and confident in this next hour. So if anyone has any questions throughout the conversation, feel free to drop any questions or reflections in the chat. You all have submitted some really awesome questions previous to this conversation. So we're going to roll with those pre-submitted questions as an anchor. But you're joining here live with us, so we want to hear from you. If at any point you have reflections, your own tips and tricks, your own resources, your own lived experience, things like that you want to share, please drop those in the chat. And as time allows, I'll raise those to our guest speakers so that they can comment on it, or maybe that will create some chatter within the chat box, and you all can network amongst yourselves there. If anyone at any point wants to hop off mute, you will be featured in our live recording as this is being recorded. But just let me know that you'd like to hop off mute, and as time allows, I'll give you permission to do so. You can, raise your emoji hand to let me know you'd like to be added to the queue, or you could, write in the chat publicly or privately. And again, as time allows, I will give you permission to do so. Now, this is being recorded, so all of you who signed up for this conversation, be looking out for a rewatch email. That email will include a link to this recorded video, along with any resources that our guest speaker might bring up throughout the hour. So be sure to look out for that email. And I know that we're going to get into some pretty sensitive, topics today. So if anyone has any sensitive information and you'd prefer to be kept anonymous, just find me in the chat box under Mariella Marie and write to me privately there. And I will raise your question or your reflection as time allows, and I'll keep you anonymous. All right, so usually I take a couple moments to briefly introduce myself before I pass the mic to our guest speaker, but I want to start to practice more of what I preach, which is, speaking of emotional intelligence at home, at work, and at play. And since we are all connected here on this beautiful earth, I just want to take a moment of silence just to support and give space for human dignity and human rights across the world. So please share this moment of silence with me. Okay, thank you. So now I would love to pass the mic over to our guest speaker, Hannah, who's calling from Atlanta. As I said before, I'm going to try to find the link where we spoke last year on our Tech for Social Impact Summit at Power to Fly around July. I'll find the link so that you can rewatch. She drops a lot of knowledge there. But Hannah, for those who have never met you, let us know a little bit about yourself, why you do what you do, and what you're excited to share with us today.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for kicking things off. Hi, everyone. My name's Hannah. My pronouns are she, her. I'm based, as mentioned, here in Atlanta. I am new here, so if anyone is in Atlanta, please let me know in the chat. Looking for friends and colleagues as well. Anyway, I'll cut to the chase. So I am the co-founder and CEO of an organization called Disclo. We actually just launched a few weeks ago, and we help companies to administer support for employees seeking anything from workplace accommodations to now helping companies as of this week, helping administer abortion support. We started this after actually running one of the most used disability recruiting platforms in the world, which is known as Chronically Capable. It still exists today. So if you are a job seeker living with some type of chronic illness, mental illness, disability, do encourage you to go check it out. Got into all of this work actually after my own experience, having navigated the workplace while living with various chronic illnesses. I was diagnosed with Lyme disease while in college. So if you're not familiar with Lyme, I was bit by a tick at some point in my life. And it really, derailed my early career. And I struggled with how to disclose this to employers. how to ask for accommodations, and how to really self-identify, because I didn't consider myself to be someone with a disability. I now would say that I am, but I knew that my story wasn't unique. I met with hundreds of people back in 2018 that were struggling with the same things as me, of wanting to work, being able and capable of working, but struggling due to their illness or disability. And so been in this space for a while, love talking about all things disability, chronic illness, support in the workplace. And yeah, really excited to be here today. Thank you all for showing up during your lunch hours if you're on the West Coast, late afternoon if you're on the East Coast, and everything in between.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. And I know you're going to probably share more of your lived experience as we roll into the questions that folks have submitted previous to today's conversation. But before we roll into those questions, can you help set the stage for today's conversation by touching these three main points? I know you might fly around in different areas, but these main 3 points that you plan to cover today.
Absolutely. So I know it's on the screen, so I apologize if I'm being repetitive at all. But today we're here to talk about disability disclosure in the workplace. It's a topic that is actually, there's not much out there, not many people out there talking about this. So hopefully this is helpful to all of you. I know there's a lack of resources. We're going to talk through the benefits of disclosure and how to actually go through that process. We're going to talk through the steps you can take to actually ask for support and request accommodations. And then, holistically, the whole thing is actually really about self-advocacy in the workplace. I think disclosure and self-advocacy go hand in hand. And how do we better advocate for ourselves and for our needs? Again, this is a free space and an open space, so feel free to ask questions in the chat as well. You can ask me anything regarding disclosure. So yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that we can pull up these awesome questions that folks have submitted. But I just want to say, we've already got folks wishing you luck in Atlanta on your new move, and, thanking you for starting the company that, is clearly necessary. And unfortunately, as you said, there aren't many folks, doing what you do. So thank you. I echo that. Thank you. Thank you. So again, folks, if you're joining, go ahead and drop things in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to get us kicked off with this first question that was submitted. And don't worry, I plan on asking Hannah all about what's currently happening, with what's going on in the States and how that's affecting the world. Again, from my perspective in Argentina, it's really crazy to see, laws being made in the States that affect us globally. So don't worry. I know you all are wanting to question, throw your questions in on that, but I do want to give some spotlight on those that were previously submitted. So let's start with this one here. What type of information should we share when disclosing a disability to an employer?
Yeah, so disclosing is a very, very personal thing, and it's something that can take a lot to do. And personally, I went through this myself, and I don't think there is a right or wrong answer as to what you should and shouldn't say. It is, again, an entirely personal decision. I'm going to share today throughout the whole conversation tips that I've found to be helpful. Again, my opinions, and so take it as a grain of salt if you wish, but to kick things off in terms of how and what to say, I think, again, this is something that it is your right to disclose. I'll probably say that a lot at any point in your employment. So that could be during an interview, that could be when you're hired and onboarded, it could be 3 years in when a life event happens and you now need some type of access to support. But I think, what we tell our job seekers is really, first off, to keep it simple. You don't have to mention the word ADA or use the phrase reasonable accommodation. Asking for an accommodation is about you getting your needs met to really be able to do the best work that you're able to do. Second, I guess this is of what type. So I was going to get into how to actually go about this, but I think, focus specifically on what you need rather than what you're living with. It is not the employer's business, although I'll get into that later, but focus on what you need rather than focusing too much on your illness or your disability. And that can really kind of ignite the conversation. And I think, again, there's no limit to how much you can or can't say, but we do advise keeping it as simple as possible, just so that, God forbid, there's no shame no stigma or bias attached when you do go through this process.
I love that. And, I love that you, of course, see this as a journey and there's no solid date or fine line when there's a moment that you need to talk about this because it is your life's journey. Right. And so to see it as it being, I think that definitely takes a lot of weight off of someone's shoulders if they don't know if, should I have said it then? When do I do it before the raise? Something like that can be daunting. So I love that you're demystifying that, time is not the issue there. So let's move into the second question here. How can we ask for accommodations when our needs are constantly changing and we don't know what we might need next?
My needs are constantly changing too. So whoever asked this question, it hits home. And I think, here again, you're able to ask for accommodations at any point. Just to throw a fact out here, 60% of adults in the United States live with some form of chronic illness. 40% live with 2 or more. There's a lot of overlap, and we can often have different life events that change our symptoms, change where we're at and what we need. I'll give a personal example. I have Lyme disease, but for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been in remission. And so therefore, right now, I actually don't have accommodation needs. And I think just bottom line is that's okay. Your needs will change, as will everyone else's. At some point in everyone's life, someone's going to have to deal with something, whether that's caregiving, pregnancy, COVID-19. And I think just being honest with yourself first and foremost about what you need today and right now, and then, communicating that to your employer. It is okay to have a request that lasts 3 months and then you have a new one. I think we have this idea that accommodations are permanent, but they are indeed ever changing. And it's really important that we assess first what we need in this moment in order to do our best work. And I think, at the end of the day, accommodations are in place for us to be able to perform equally as our peers and to be able to do our job best. And so having to adapt that is totally fine. And I think just being honest with yourself and your body, what you're going through is really important there.
Absolutely. The adaptability piece shines through on this response, as I think we are all trying to learn how to be more adaptable and just flexible in general, as so many things are changing. And, of course, before thinking about the economy or, our social systems, our bodies change all the time as we, grow older, as we learn different things, as we move around the world. And so just to keep in mind that, we need to be flexible. We need to lean into our innate spirit that is, to how to be adaptable. And it's interesting to think about that in the workplace, because historically speaking, we haven't been allowed to, speak this transparently and also have the kind of support system that, that we're seeing at virtual events, for example. So someone wrote in the chat when you apologize for being repetitive, for reading what's on the screen. GR wrote, we may have some visually impaired folks who may need to hear the info displayed on this slide. So I feel like, as we even make comments on people, speaking and how we're sharing community virtually, we're all learning in these new ways. And so adaptability is key. So thank you for highlighting that.
Of course.
All right, so let's move on to this next question here. How can we get better at self-advocating for ourselves at work? Would love to learn more about your journey.
It's a loaded question. So, I want to just kind of start off and define what self-advocacy means to me. I think it probably means something different to all of us, and that, again, is okay. But really, I think self-advocacy is the ability to speak up for yourself. It's understanding your needs and your strengths and understanding your legal rights. And then being able to communicate that to others, like I'm trying to do to you all today. And in the workplace, for those of us who do need accommodations from our employers, I do think it's really important that first and foremost, we know our rights. When I mentioned this before, but I never considered myself as someone with a disability. Back I was 21 years old and I was living with chronic illness, and I had a permanent IV in my arm, also known as a PICC line. And at the time, I was definitely someone living with a disability, but I didn't self-identify as that. And so for me, I think the ADA was a very foreign concept to me. I didn't understand. Oh, and for those of you who aren't familiar, ADA stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act. I had never heard of it. I didn't know how it worked. I had no idea. And so the moment I actually printed out all of the pages of pretty dense text and read through the ADA, I think that was one of those aha moments for me of, wow, there are laws that exist to support people like me, even if I don't, know how to even approach this conversation. There's laws that support that exist to help people like me. And I think that realization was really important moving forward. And so I think number one, first and foremost, is to do your research. I'm happy to share some resources in the chat here as well. But do your research and learn about knowing your rights. I am not an attorney. I will probably, try to avoid any legal jargon today. But yeah, I think first and foremost is understanding your rights. And then from there, understanding how, what do you need in order to be your best self at work? So again, thinking about, what is it that I need in order to show up today? And is it I need to have a standing desk? Is it that I need to have remote work because it enables me to administer my medication? Thinking deep about what you really need, and then learning how to communicate that. And I think that's really what we're going to be diving into today, I hope. But I think self-advocacy, again, at its core is understanding the context and what are your rights, and then being able to understand what you need, and then being able to communicate that to others. Could that be a colleague, a boss, a friend? But yeah, I think we're going to probably dive deeper into this as the questions go. So I'll kind of leave it there for now, and we can dive deep.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And feel free to dive deep also anytime, because the chat box is already lighting up, and I want to make sure that we get, what you want to speak about, what's happening in the chat, and also the previously submitted questions. But I do want to highlight some things that are happening in the chat. So Emily writes, if your dog diagnoses you with a disability, what is the best way to approach your boss and your HR organization?
Yeah, great question. And I think, one of the big things is that every single company has their own process for handling disability disclosures and accommodation requests. It's what has really prompted us to start Disclo. There is no standard process. It's messy, it's complicated, it's inaccessible. There's stigma and bias attached to it. And so I think, it's going to be case by case, depending on the company. And I think, certain companies will have a formal procedure where you can submit a form through, I don't know, your employee internal server. Some will have you talk to your HR manager. That's why we created Disclo, to really streamline this process and create a safe space for people to disclose. So if you are at a company that's got a mid to large company, definitely tell them about Disclo so we can try to make that very accessible for you. But I think in terms of speaking directly to HR, it's going to go back to the things I was mentioning before of, keep it short. You don't have to mention the ADA. You don't have to mention reasonable accommodation. I'd say put it in writing. Writing is so important. I wish more people knew this. But if a conversation happens and there's no actual formal dialogue written down and no paper trail of this, God forbid something goes awry, you're not able to actually prove that without it being in writing. And so I do think keeping these transactions in writing is really important. And then I'd say, again, just talking to HR directly. Don't go to your manager. Some companies are so small that that's the only option. And I'm not speaking to that, but I think, making sure that you're speaking to HR, it can be really uncomfortable to share with your direct supervisors or your managers. So it's best to work with HR to go through that. Again, just to kind of touch upon this. So Disclo, I kind of briefed over this before, but Disclo is, we work with companies to actually help administer accommodations. And so if I were someone living with anxiety, let's say, and I have to go to therapy on Thursdays, and so my accommodation is leave, or flexible work and leave schedule, we'd come through Disclo. I would disclose this to Disclo. I would request leave on Thursdays. The company could then ask to verify this or not. But Disclo never shares your personal health information with the employer. So all we're doing is saying that Hannah has this request and Hannah is verified. And we think that's really, really important because we actually are taking the stance that your underlying condition is irrelevant to your employer and it's not their business to know. So yeah, I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about that later, but to your question, I think, was your name Mary? I don't have it up in front of me.
Emily.
Emily,
Yeah,
to your question though, Emily, I think it's going to be dependent. Hopefully more companies will start using Disclose, so it's not something that's different at every company. That was a long-winded answer.
No, and I appreciate the long-winded answer, and just again, love the work that you all are doing at Disclo, and I'm sure lots of folks really appreciate that you all started this. So thank you. So I think that this is a perfect time to kind of hit some current event hot topics that are happening now. Today is June 29th. And so given the recent overturning of Roe versus Wade, there are definitely a lot of unknown unknowns. And companies around the US are announcing various plans to support employees needing to travel out of the state to access care. Any comments on this? As I know this is a definitely top of mind kind of thing for a lot of people in this specific virtual space, as well as those who might be rewatching.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been a pretty hard week for probably a lot of us here. So first, want to just recognize that if you're feeling fear and all of these emotions that I'm sure a lot of us are feeling, you're not alone. I'm experiencing it as well. My colleague the other day, I actually think she might be in the chat. I didn't know she was coming to this, but my colleague Shanique actually said to me on Friday, I was telling her, hey, I'm really worried about this and I'm kind of freaking out. And she said to me that she had learned that action can replace worry. And that has really helped me over the last few days of just realizing how can we take action. So as many of you may have seen on the internet, tons of companies are now starting to roll out support for their employees, whether those be reimbursements for out-of-state travel, whether they be reimbursements through insurance or extended leave, these types of things. And there's a big issue with that. It's great. And I am so happy to see as many companies I've seen do this. But the big issue is the questions around how. How are they going to do this in a way that's compliant, that's confidential, and that doesn't really hurt the individual when they're already going through such a vulnerable and scary process? And so our headquarters is in Austin, Texas. I'm in Atlanta, as we know, but used to be in Austin. And so we've been thinking about this for a few months here. The reality is that, my co-founder even had a friend recently have to leave the state of Texas for this. And so we've been thinking about it and acting on it kind of behind the scenes, hoping that this wouldn't be a reality. But now that it is, we have taken a stance as a company to help companies to administer these benefits in a way where it's only the right people are seeing this information, and it's very private and all HIPAA compliant. And so I think, just as we think about all of this, and if you are at a company right now that is starting to roll this out, I'd question them of how they're going to do this, because I wouldn't recommend people emailing this. There's a lot of fear of liability, the government finding out, these types of things. And so I definitely would question your companies, ask them, are they training HR leaders on how to respond to these requests? Ask them, challenge them. I am challenging myself because I don't know everything, but if you're at a company right now, I definitely would push on, what are we doing? What's our company's plan? Who is this helping? Is it just helping employees, or is it also helping dependents? And what are we doing to actually administer these in a way that's safe for us as employees? And so those are the three things I'd say I encourage folks to do. But yeah, it's been a hard week here in the States. And to all of you, again, I love that phrase, action replaces worry. So take action in whatever way feels right for you. But yeah.
Thank you again, Hannah, for all the work you're doing. Crazy time to be alive, but a great time to be alive. I find myself saying, there's so many things just that are getting stirred up in our social systems. And so, when we speak on inclusion and equity and diversity and psychological safety and human rights in general, I have to hope that, we are not just tuning in for a brief time to hear what people think, and that we're bringing some of these resources and actionable, steps into our lives so that we can leave this place a little better for, for the future generations that come. So something that I've been just reflecting on in the work that I do is how there are, in several cultures, they speak of, what we do right now affects 7 generations in the future. And what has been done 7 generations ago is still affecting us today. So just to have this wider vision of our decisions that we're making, and how can we hold each other accountable, essentially, to be the change that we want to see. So this was a big question that I personally had, like, okay, how are these companies gonna, continue? Is this another thing, that when there was a lot of police brutality, a lot of companies put up these, statements, and then, well, we look today and there's still a lot of room for improvement. So I have to hope that companies like yours can help, actually support these statements that these companies are making. So thank you. I have some more questions here that are coming up. I'm going to proofread them a little bit, but until then, let's move on to this next question that was previously submitted. So where can we find companies that are committed to disability accommodations? I'm getting tired of having to explain and fight for my rights.
Head over to Chronically Capable. It's, we actually on that end specifically work with companies that we vet. We've turned down companies before. I think we're at like 6 we've turned down because they've come to us and immediately you can tell that this is for exactly what you just mentioned, Mariella, of like, we're just here because we want press and we want to show the world that we care when they don't actually care. So on the Chronically Capable side, those are companies we really believe can support folks with varying needs and accommodation preferences. And so definitely there's tons of jobs there. There's so many amazing employers. Some companies I personally really like, I think, let me think about that. Shanique probably has a better idea of the ones that are the most inclusive right now. I'm trying to give you an inside scoop, but head over to Chronically Capable, go check it out. Otherwise, I think, there's definitely resources state by state that help, from a government's perspective and helping people find work. I will say that a lot of these can sometimes be a bit antiquated and not very easy to access, ironically. But yeah, there's tons of resources out there. I don't want to just sit here and plug our businesses all day, so I'll stop there.
Great.
Yeah, we do help with that.
Of course. So we'll add the links in the rewatch email. So check that out. And you said Shanique is here in the chat, like dropping lots of knowledge as well. So continue to add things, Shanique. We'll be looking out for that. All right. So let's dive in a little more to the legal side of things. So this question reads, from a legal standpoint, how should companies react to accommodation requests?
Yeah. So just to again, I'm going to make a big disclaimer. I'm not an attorney. So nothing I say is legal advice. This is just things I've learned. So I just want to make that very clear. I am not an attorney. But yeah, I think, first and foremost, to backtrack a little bit, the ADA, again, Americans with Disabilities Act, is a law. I think we're hitting 32 years in July. I could be wrong. But it's laws that have existed to support people with disabilities and gaining access to everyday things, such as being able to access buildings, being able to access work. And the ADA has developed and changed a bit over the years. But there's something about the Americans with Disabilities Act. So essentially, there's this thing called the interactive process, and it's the negotiation between an employee and a company in terms of deciding on what your accommodation will be at work. So companies do have the ability to negotiate, especially when costs can be really high. Say someone's asking for $1,000 chair, but the company only has $800 left in their budget. There can be negotiation in those places. And so really, I think for companies in terms of responding, number one thing I say to companies, legal aside, is empathy. Respond with empathy. Listen to the person who is sharing something that is so vulnerable and often so scary to that individual. Hear them, listen to them, show that you're paying attention and show that you care. My mom told me as a kid, this phrase is kind of silly, but I love it. It's nice to be nice to the nice. And I think that applies to most things in my life, but be nice, listen, and listen to that individual and hear them out. Then from a legal standpoint of how you can actually respond, make sure that there's a paper trail. Again, what we've learned over the last few years is that there has been no formal process. And so companies have been handling this very ad hoc and oftentimes offline. That's what we're trying to really fix at Disclose, so it's done in a very safe, streamlined, compliant way. But yeah, make sure that you're not having a breach of HIPAA or ADA laws. Make sure that you're not sharing this person's information on Slack or your messaging chats. Keep it safe, keep it locked off, and most importantly, keep all of this information separate from the employee's file. There can be no personal health information attached to an employee's file. Again, I'm not an attorney. I could get way more deep into this, and I'll send some things in the chat. So give me a second while I look those up.
Absolutely. And as you look those up, I love that if I can just reflect a little on the emotional intelligence piece that you're clearly putting at the center of the stage, which I love. It's the empathy part of the whole puzzle, because I know that I'm going to try to search for this as you respond to this next question, but I interviewed a beautiful mind about the role of HR in companies. And one of the main things that she said that you're echoing now is write it down, send an email, like get it, have that paper trail. And then also that HR doesn't work for you. They work to not get sued. So to, also keep that in mind. They are there to negotiate things to hopefully, put out fires. But again, to empower you to get what you need and to find, people like Hannah who can speak the language and also can, share resources. So I appreciate that. Speaking of resources, I know you're dropping some resources in the chat, so be sure to look for that. And folks who don't have access to the live chat, if you're rewatching this, you can just go to their website, disclo.com/resources. So you'll see some there. And let's move on to this next question that digs a little deeper into the resources. So speaking specifically to leadership teams, do you have any resources that can bring leadership teams to help them jumpstart their awareness and support around accommodations?
Yeah, so a great place to start is the Job Accommodation Network. It's something that is brought to us by the I think it's the EEOC. It's the government brings it to us. One of the government's labor agencies. I can't remember off the top of my head. Now it's going to bother me and I'm going to think about it for the next 5 minutes. But anyways, if someone can figure it out while I'm on this, let me know and write in the chat. But the Job Accommodation Network offers a ton of resources and education regarding accommodations, regarding disclosures, what types of accommodations work for who. The resources I just sent in the chat, another great place to start. But I think, there is such a lack of education in this space. We've been inundated with lunch and learn sessions over the last several months, which are basically lunchtime sessions where my team educates employers and HR teams often on how do you handle these requests? How do you, be a good ally or be a good colleague to someone living with these things. And so encourage your companies to take part in these types of educational sessions. We are not the only company doing this. There's some great people out there. Katarina Rivera is someone who does some great lunch and learn sessions. But make sure you follow people. I'll send a resource which Shanique does not have, but it's something that I share during our lunch and learn sessions with companies. And it's basically Hannah's master list. It's essentially a Google document that I just add resources as I see them. And that's kind of my go-to for people to follow, movies to be watching, all of these things. Absorb it. It's our duty as allies, as people in this space, to learn and to put in the effort. We can't just look to people with disabilities to educate us. We've got to go put in the work, and we've got to read, and we've got to. Yeah. Oh, Shanique figured it out. It's the Office of Disability Employment. Yeah, that's what it is. But yes, I will put Hannah's resources in the chat. These are just some of my favorites.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that Shanique is here.
I know. I didn't know that Shanique was going to be here. So thanks, Shanique, for chiming in.
Cool. Okay. So I've got a couple of private messages that I'm going to read them both. I think you'll see why, and just feel free to ask me to repeat, because I think they kind of, they're living in the same response somewhere. So this first one reads, I've had several experiences where a target was put on my back once I disclosed, even through HR. I work as a contract recruiter and IT consultant. I've actually been treated worse as a recruiter because IT consultants are in demand. It's very difficult to get EEOC support or a lawyer when you work short assignments versus long-term permanent work with documented discrimination. What is your opinion, Hannah, about contract workers seeking accommodation and filing EEOC claims? So that's one. Okay, so I'll pause there because I think that you probably just would like that reflection time. So I won't go into the next one.
It's a great question. And again, I just want to disclaim that I'm not an attorney. I wish I was. My partner will be in a few years, so hopefully I can get some help with these kinds of questions. But to my knowledge, the ADA does apply to full-time equivalent employees. That's the law. And so I actually don't know too much in terms of contract workers. I would check with your local state before going to the EEOC and try to ask. I know it's on a state-by-state basis, but I don't know anything about contract workers. So I apologize.
I feel like, if I could just do some personal reflection here, I think it's like a loophole too, like it kind of, and I don't have any specific company in mind when I speak to this, but I see, even especially as a person who travels the world, there is this almost lack of accountability if you don't have the person that's full time. So it's kind of like, okay, good luck, take care of yourself. So another reason to empower yourself, to look out for yourself, to get things that you need. And especially if it's for contract work. And I think, hopefully as we're learning how to speak in this space and navigate this changing landscape, we can, be more confident in asking for what we need. So things are changing, and that I feel like that is an area where companies can take more initiative to say, even if you're contract, you're our people, we're going to make sure you're good. I digress. That's just my own personal reflection. Okay, so this next private question reads, why do companies want to know about disabilities, especially in advance, and even things like a GI issue? Will it hurt in being hired or help? What about in promotions? Will it hurt or help? So this is a great question. Hannah, what's your response on this one?
It's a great question, and it's something we talk a lot about with companies. I hear a lot from companies, well, we don't have many people disclosing, so why would we use a software to help with this? And I say, well, that's a problem. We want more people to disclose, and here's why. First and foremost, we want to understand our employee population. It's incredibly important to understand our people and to know what our employees are living with. I could go on this for a while. I'm going to try to keep this brief. Give me a second to condense what I want to say. Okay. So number of reasons. Culturally, there are tons of benefits to knowing your workforce. There's been a ton of studies. HBR does a great one of this. HBR is Harvard Business Review. And it talks about the increase in employee productivity, retention, happiness at work. If you think about it, if you chuck a huge piece of yourself at the door each day and you're sitting at your desk and you're getting thrown tasks, but you've left out a huge piece of your identity, it's psychologically exhausting. And that can be something that's very challenging for employees. And so by better understanding the needs of our employees, we can better support them and better enable them to perform in their job and to enjoy their job. So that's kind of on the cultural side. From an economic standpoint and from a legal standpoint, there are so many issues and lawsuits, again, that are skyrocketing. Disability now makes up a third of EEOC lawsuits. It's the second highest category filed, followed by retaliation. And a lot of retaliation cases are also disability related. And so companies need to know this information so they can support their employees and so they can ensure that they're actually doing what they say. So that's, from a legal standpoint, super important. There's also specific disability hiring mandates for certain companies. I don't want to get too much into that because it's pretty complex, but Section 503 is what that's called, if you want to check that out. But really, I think by encouraging disclosure, the point of disclosure is to get access to support or accommodations, in short, or for most people. And so by encouraging this, we're able to help our employees to thrive and to be their true selves at work. And I think, if anything, that's the most important reason why an employer should ever, encourage this. so the second question, I believe, was around, Mariella, it was around, and wouldn't this hurt me and my ability to be promoted?
Yeah, does it help or does it hurt? What is like, so beyond the purpose, will it hurt or help when things like, hiring come up or promotions, things like that?
I mean, it can. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat things, because there are some companies and there's some bad apples within companies who have done this in the past, who have discriminated on the basis of someone's disability. I really dislike that that's a reality, but it is a reality, and I can't, lie about it. But in many cases, companies are starting to be much more forward thinking about this. I say that because because we're getting inundated with companies reaching out to us. And I think, from your perspective, the reason you would disclose again is to ask for accommodations. And if you need an accommodation to be able to do your job, then it's really important that you do disclose so you can get access to that accommodation. If there's circumstances where you feel it may hurt you, it's going to happen to be a case-by-case basis, and it's an entirely personal decision. Now in my life, having lived really open and authentically over the last few years, I feel better having disclosed. I've basically told the world that I have a disability, and if all of my companies fail and I'm going to go find a job, you can Google it and you can find this out about me. But I'm happy about that, because I know that I'm living authentically, and I know that by disclosing, I'm getting access to the support that I need. And I can explain the things that I need because of that. But again, it's such a personal decision. I would never sit here and tell you you should or you shouldn't. You need to come to that on your own. And I encourage you to, do some digging and figure out what's best for you, because there's not a one size fits all solution or answer here.
I love that. I think you're completely right with, I think we look for these cookie cutter answers for such complex and also personal experiences. And as we're reshaping, let's say, the workforce, because if we look at our parents' generation and of course beyond that, these conversations weren't happening. And I can't say that this kind of language was being used. And so again, I know I'm repeating myself, but this is it's a great time to be alive, to be experimenting with this with empathy, and hopefully we can go and just change the scene. And this doesn't even have to be talked about. And of course, you'll still be in business, because this doesn't mean that I find with the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work, it's like, at some point, hopefully this doesn't even have to be a job, a role. And it's not like I'm going to keep it because I need the job and I need to, hopefully, help people get to their initiatives. Hopefully you learn how to do these things on your own. And so just opening the conversation with this knowledge and sharing resources again, it's so key. So thank you. We've only got about a little over 15 minutes left. So I'm going to pull from, we got a couple more previously submitted questions. And I just want to remind our live listeners, if you've got anything coming to mind, drop them in the chat here. All right. So this question reads, I'm struggling with depression, and I dealt with lots of anxiety attacks at the office when starting a new treatment. I never felt comfortable or safe enough to disclose my situation to my leaders, since I'm afraid they'll start to think I'm too sensitive or that I can't handle my job. How can we make sure our disclosure isn't used against us?
Sorry, I was on mute and I didn't realize it. So again, this is a very personal example that someone has shared. And so thank you for sharing this and asking this. And I don't want to be repetitive about this, but I feel it is really case by case basis. Unfortunately, the way that the world exists, there are some companies that have bad apples within those companies and have handled things wrong. But I think, that's exactly one of the reasons we created Disclo, is so that only the right people know, and that they don't know your underlying condition. I think, to me, I just feel so angry that we have to tell what we live with to our employer instead of just what we need. Like, why has our society put us in a place where we're forced to give answers and explanations to what we need? And so I think, moving forward, I hope to see more companies focus on how do we build workplaces that are inclusive and equitable and accessible for everyone, so that everyone can thrive. So it doesn't have to be this culture where you're forced to share such a vulnerable piece of who you are. And so I think, to your question, it's a super personal example, and I don't know you, and I don't know what company you work at. So I'm going to pause there just because it's a little bit specific, and I don't know the underlying details.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you gave a nice overview, and this is actually a good time. If folks are interested in connecting with you, Hannah, when we run out of time here, we're in about 15 minutes. How can they find you?
Oh, yeah. So our website is disclo.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I love posting on LinkedIn. My name is Hannah Rose Olson on LinkedIn. But yeah, come hang out with us. Also on the chronically capable side, we've got a great community. So if you're someone living with chronic illness, disability, mental illness, anything that affects your life, we have a great community platform called Club Capable. Shanique, who's been in the chat, is actually our community manager. It's essentially like a LinkedIn, but for our community, and it's a really safe space. And so if you're looking for support, looking for career advice, wanting to ask more of these questions, come join us. And that website is www.wearecapable.org, because we're all capable. Remember that.
I love this. This is great. I remember when you first shared about why you started your company. And again, I invite folks to rewatch that conversation because Hannah speaks. I think right now you're speaking more about Disclo, but before you were speaking more about the Capable company. So can you tell me the name again one more time?
Chronically Capable.
Chronically Capable. Yes. So you were talking more about Chronically Capable. And I was just so enamored with just the beautiful, the journey that led you to find, that space there. So I'm happy to hear that the community is thriving on that side.
Yeah, you last time we spoke was pre-Disclo days.
Exactly.
We've only been disclosing for a month here, in the public, so.
Yes, I love that. Right. Okay, great. And so, of course, Shanique has dropped the links on how to connect with Hannah in the chat, also Chronically Capable link in the chat as well. So let's move on to this next question here, which gets more into, when folks are applying to jobs, how to speak about maybe taking time off, gaps in resumes, how to tackle that in an interview and things like that. So I'm going to read this one question, but if you'd like to, bridge your response on the whole, job search process, and with, what do I do? Do I disclose? Do I not? I would love to hear your response. So this exact question reads, there is a gap in my resume due to my disability. I always disclose my disability when applying for positions. However, I'm getting no closer to finding a job. Any advice for handling disclosure during interviews? And could this impact negatively on our chances of getting the job?
It's a great question, and it's one we get really often. I'm going to give a personal response to this, not anything that reflects anyone else on my team or my company's views or anything. This is just me being honest. I think that you should, or I'm of the belief that people should disclose and ask for accommodations that are or ask for accommodations that are specific to the interview itself. So if you need screen reader software, if you need a live interpreter, these things, ask that. I think you should disclose once you've gotten the job, just because there are, again, those bad apples. And I think once you're hired, tell them whatever you want to tell them. And if they fire you, if they discriminate against you, that is illegal. And so, that's, again, just a personal decision. Some people want to test the company out and test the waters and see, is this a company that actually truly cares? And in those cases, you can ask questions. What are your accommodations policies? What are some examples of accommodations you've asked for or offered for employees in the past? These types of things. And I think that's a great way of testing out and seeing is this a company that's right for me? But we say this to job seekers all the time. Also remember that when you're interviewing at a company, also interview the company. Decide and ask questions back to them of, is this the right culture fit? I've gotten jobs before that the culture is awful and you're just like, why am I here? And so it's also your job to suss that out when you're going through this process. So again, that's just my personal opinion, but yeah.
I love that. Thank you for your personal opinion. I think it's invaluable to get your personal opinion. So thank you for sharing. Okay, so let's say that this person has an interview. This is a different question, but I'm taking us through the same hero journey in this case. So when having an interview, what are some questions we can ask about accommodations we might need in the workplace?
Yeah, so I think what I was just kind of touching upon a little bit was I think it's good to ask about their culture. How would you describe your company's culture? That's number one. And that's the most vague thing you can ask, dig deeper. So I think, ask, are there examples of, you don't have to tell me the person's name, but are there examples of people who asked for accommodations? What was that process like? Asking if the company has a formal process for requesting accommodations, ask about benefits and the health insurance plan. I think health insurance is something that a lot of people don't ask about when they're going through the interview process because you just want to get the job. But the worst thing is ending up at a job that you sort of like, but then they have a terrible health insurance policy. So make sure you ask about that, especially if you're undergoing long-term care and have specific medications or doctors you need to see. So I think asking around is always a good thing to do. And it also puts people on the spot to think and realize, hey, maybe we haven't really thought about this or we're not communicating this better. And so it's a great way to kind of test the waters. And just, again, interview the company just as they're interviewing you. I've sat in on some interviews before and it's like, I'm just asking, or, I've interviewed people before and I'll ask them questions. And then I get to the point of, well, do you have any questions for me? And they don't have any questions. I'm like, well, how do you know that I'm a good boss? And what, how do you know what our policies are, our time off policies? What's our, leave policy? Or how many sick days do you have? Do you have unlimited sick days? Ask back. It's your turn to be able to do that. So yeah.
I love that. Yes. To, be the captain of our ship, essentially, right? And to also know that it's a two-way street, that you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. That's so important. Something that I try to echo during our virtual career fairs that we do with Power to Fly. It's like, make sure you're asking them some tough questions, and maybe the clients don't like that I'm doing that, but I think it's important. We have to be able to ask, and I love that even with your example, I hope that someone can take that language and, maybe tweak it to how they need it, but be able to literally say that and speak that in their next interview and feel more confident in that. So thank you for that language there. All right, so let's move into, okay, so same hero journey. Someone has been hired and now, they are getting their requests for accommodations granted. So this kind of leads into, the coworker relationship scenario. So any advice on navigating needed or granted accommodations with colleagues, supervisors, or managers? For instance, if I'm granted a flexible or remote schedule and the rest of my team isn't, they will want to know why. While we're all entitled to privacy, in my experience, if we don't share with our colleagues, it negatively impacts our working relationships and environment. Would you like to comment on that, Hannah?
Yeah, I think you can just bypass the disclosing your underlying condition and just say I have accommodations. And that's not your business. It is definitely something we've heard from people before, and I hate that that's a thing. Also, coworkers need to stop butting out of need to get out of other people's business. But I think just saying I have a reasonable accommodation plan is a great way to put it. You do not have to share, and I probably wouldn't recommend doing it unless it's people you trust. Again, I think that whoever asked this question, if you're here, if this was a pre-submitted one, I'll just say that you touched upon this yourself. That legally they can't do this, and legally it's you don't have to share with your colleagues. However, we just know in reality that's not always the case. I think with remote work, it's been a bit easier for people to kind of hide what they're going through and what they're getting from their employer in terms of accommodations. But I'd say just say, personally, I just feel like I have a reasonable accommodation, but yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know if that was a great way to put it, but
no, I think it's great. And I think, it would be interesting to also hear what other folks have been experiencing, if they have experienced this kind of thing as well, because I know that this was a live question. So I want to hear what other people have to share as far as their lived experience as well. Because again, like you said, Hannah, it's not a one size fits all, and it depends. Like some people identify as being more introverted, and then in that case, you would do things differently than someone who doesn't identify that way. So, I think that, one of the main tips I want to highlight is don't try to do things the way other people would do, and listen to yourself, have that self-awareness piece, and then move out into the world, with your authentic being, leading and being more confident in that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I am curious if anyone else has experienced this. If you want to write it in the chat, what you've done with this. I've been the CEO for a few years, so I haven't had people asking me in terms of this. And also, I would reckon to say my company is very inclusive, and we kind of know, like, don't ask unless someone tells you. And but I'm curious if anyone has any tips for this.
All right, so keep that coming in the chat in case anyone has any tips. Yes. Okay. I appreciate finding a non-rude, polite way of saying none of your business without.
Yeah, it's hard. That came up with that on the spot. There, I could probably think of something a little more eloquent, but
no,
none your business.
Yeah, we need to speak our truths more. So I think something that I've adopted in my language also is that no is a full sentence. No is a complete sentence. And we don't need
period. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to highlight something that was dropped in the chat a little earlier on, just to hear your perspective and any, reflections you'd like to share, as well as the workspace in general, at least, in my lifetime after college, I would say, I think it's great that like my nieces and nephews get to come into the workplace where these are already, topics that people talk about. But I would say definitely the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging space is like, super new. And so lots of us are learning what to do. And I want to just highlight something that someone has dropped in the chat and just hear your reflection on this, so that we can learn from you also and learn with you on how to just not dig a deeper hole for folks who might be, marginalized already, and then having this fear of disclosing or not affecting their ability to work and get paid. So this person dropped in the chat, as a person of color, I want to add, for any person of color in attendance, disclosing our conditions may add another bias on top of racial or ethnic discrimination. So Hannah, I'd love to just hear you comment on this.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I think, especially the term D&I has become so broad. And I think, again, you touched upon this earlier, but I think that companies do a lot of efforts to say that they care, but then the action doesn't necessarily meet the mouth or the words. And so it's definitely something to keep in mind. And I think just remembering it's your choice, what you share, what you do not. It's legally your right. And think about that again, or think about that wisely and what you want to share. But hopefully, the more we talk about this and the more we elevate these conversations and get people sharing their success stories, their non-success stories, but just talking about it, it will become less of a thing that people even care about. It's, at the end of the day, I'm like, why do we even have to sit here and talk about disclosing our disabilities? It's a human right. And I think, we all just have to keep being here, showing up to these events, talking, learning, educating ourselves, educating others. But yeah, it's definitely something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And with that said, this has been an hour that has flown by with such rich information. So thank you, Hannah, for dropping knowledge and for adding resources. Thank you, everyone who's been here live and in the chat. Be looking out for the rewatch email. We're going to compile all these links that Shanique has dropped in the chat, as well as any others that Hannah wants to add in there. We're going to add those to your rewatch email so that you can easily access them. Hannah, any final words to keep us encouraged, food for thought, as we spend our last 60 seconds here together?
Oh, I will just say, everyone, take care of yourself during these times. I know it's been a lot lately, a lot for a lot of years. Give yourself an extra hug, a little bit of self-love, and check on your friends and check on yourself. And thank you all for showing up today. It means a lot to me. So hope to connect with some of you guys off of here, since I haven't gotten to hear you guys, and I can't really read the chat because I'm bad at multitasking. So come reach out to me. I think Shanique gave my LinkedIn, but would love to talk with you guys offline.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. Enjoy the rest of your day in Atlanta, and everyone take care of yourselves, be safe, and we'll see you on the next Chat and Learn. Ciao, ciao.